The sun beat down like punishment from God. Heat waves shimmered above the dirt, twisting the horizon into ghosts. Inside a broken-down horse barn, the air was thick with dust and the stench of fear. Tala, a young Apache girl no older than 17, stood barefoot on the splintered boards, wrists bound with rusted iron. Her ankles were cracked and bleeding, her long black hair matted with sand and sweat. No one spoke her name. The auctioneer called her the Wild One, as if that erased the blood and memory running in her veins. His voice echoed off the wooden beams, sharp, greasy, and full of mockery. Next one? Strong back, no family, no tribe left to come for her. Start at $5, the crowd murmured, shifting in the haze. Men in sun-faded coats and sweat-stained hats squinted at her like sizing up a mare. Someone spat on the ground. Another laughed. "5's too much. She looks half-starved." Tala didn't move. Didn't blink. Her heart was hammering, but her face was carved from stone. She had learned that tears were wasted out here. They only made men crueler. The auctioneer frowned when no one raised a hand. He turned, frustrated. "Come on, gentlemen. She's strong. Got the look of a worker if you break her in." And then a voice came from the back. Calm. Deep. The kind of voice that didn't need to shout to be heard. 20. Heads turned. A man stood near the door, tall, weathered, his hat shadowing a face lined with years of sun and guilt. His name was Eli Tanner, owner of a small ranch at the edge of nowhere. The auctioneer blinked in disbelief. $20? You sure, Tanner? Eli nodded once. No one else spoke. The gavel hit the block. Sold. The sound cracked through the barn like thunder. Tala didn't even flinch. When they cut the rope binding her wrists, she nearly stumbled, her knees giving out. Eli caught her before she fell, and in that single second, their eyes met. Her gaze was sharp, green flecked with amber, the kind that once belonged to the forests her people had called home before they were burned to ash. Eli froze. Beneath the dirt on her wrist, he saw a small, crescent-shaped scar. He remembered wrapping that wound 8 years ago, on a night when the sky glowed red with fire and screams. He had told the little girl it wouldn't leave a mark. He had lied. Outside, the auctioneer counted his money. Inside, Eli Tanner stood beside the girl who didn't speak, feeling the weight of every sin his father ever committed pressing down on him. When they stepped out into the sunlight, the desert wind howled like it carried the ghosts of the Apache dead. Eli pulled off his hat, looked at Tala, and whispered more to himself than to her. No one should ever wear chains in a free country. Tala didn't answer. She only turned her face away, eyes fixed on the horizon, toward the land that once belonged to her people, now nothing but dust and memory. The road stretched out beneath the furnace of the Arizona sun, a long ribbon of dirt and regret. The world smelled of sagebrush and old dust, of horses and ghosts. Eli Tanner rode slow, his horse's hooves crunching over dry earth. A few paces behind him, Tala followed on a smaller mare, her back straight, her face unreadable beneath a curtain of tangled black hair. She hadn't said a word since the auction. Not one. The only sound between them was the steady clink of the chain still hanging from her wrist. It wasn't tight, but it was there, like a reminder of every lie this country told about freedom. Eli reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small key. He stopped his horse and turned. "Hold still," he said softly. Tala didn't move. Her eyes, fierce and tired, locked on him like a wildcat waiting for a trap to spring. "I ain't gonna hurt you," Eli added. "Not ever." He stepped closer, slow enough for her to see his hands. Dust swirled between them. The air shimmered with heat. When the key turned and the shackle fell, Tala didn't thank him. She just rubbed her wrist and whispered under her breath in Apache, words he couldn't understand but felt in his bones. Eli looked down at the iron cuff in his palm, the sun glinting off its edge. "No one should wear these," he muttered, tossing it into the sand. They rode on. The land opened wide, endless plains broken by jagged mesas and dying mesquite trees. A hawk circled overhead, its cry slicing through the silence. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled, distant, hollow, like the memory of cannons long gone quiet. After an hour, Eli pulled his horse to a stop beneath a twisted oak, the only shade for miles. "Here," he said, holding out his canteen. "You need water." Tala hesitated. The way she looked at him, it wasn't hate exactly, but something heavier. Distrust. Weariness. She took the canteen with both hands, drank slowly, then wiped her mouth with the back of her arm. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, dry as the dust underfoot. "You paid for me. Do what you want." The words cut through him sharper than barbed wire. For a long while, Eli just stood there, silent, hat in hand. He wanted to tell her everything. The fire, his father's lies, the way he'd tried to stop it. But the words jammed in his throat. "I didn't buy you," he said at last. "I just didn't want to see them sell you again." Tala laughed once, a bitter, humorless sound. "You think that makes it better?" He didn't answer. There wasn't one. They rode again, two figures moving through a world that had long since forgotten kindness. As the sun began to sink, painting the sky in blood and gold, Eli could see the outline of his ranch in the distance, a lonely shape against the dying light. He glanced back at the girl, small and defiant against the vast horizon. She looked forward, not at him. He didn't expect her to. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and the echo of a past neither could escape. And for the first time, Eli Tanner realized something he hadn't dared admit aloud. He hadn't saved her. Maybe she was the one meant to save him. The road home was a ribbon of rust-colored dust stretching into the horizon. Eli Tanner rode ahead, his shoulders heavy beneath the fading light. Behind him, Tala followed in silence, the soft jangle of her broken chain echoing through the desert like a sermon of guilt. The heat of the day was dying, but the earth still breathed fire. The air shimmered, carrying the scent of dry grass, horses, and the long-forgotten smoke of old sins. Eli could hear her mare's hooves crunching the gravel, slow, careful. She rode straight-backed, her expression hidden behind wind-tossed hair. He could feel her eyes on his back, watching, measuring, waiting for something. Maybe kindness, maybe betrayal. He stopped near a cluster of boulders and turned his horse sideways, the creak of leather filling the silence. "Sun's dropping," he said. "We'll camp here a while." Tala didn't answer. She slid off her horse, landing lightly on bare feet, the sand clinging to her skin. Her wrists, raw and bruised where the shackles had been, caught the dying light. Eli dismounted and led his horse to a patch of shade, his movements slow, deliberate. He knew sudden gestures made wild things run, and Tala had every reason to run. He struck a match, lit a small fire, and handed her a piece of hardtack and dried beef. She took it, but didn't eat right away. "Go on," he said quietly. "It's not poisoned." Her lips twitched, almost a smile, but it faded as quick as it came. "You don't have to play good man, rancher," she murmured. You already paid your price." He didn't argue. What could he say? That the price he paid wasn't for her freedom, but for his father's sins? That no amount of dollars could buy back what fire had taken? As night settled, the desert turned to silver. Crickets began their lonely chorus. Tala sat a few feet from the fire, her knees drawn up, eyes fixed on the flames like she was watching old memories burn again. Eli studied her through the flicker of light, the delicate lines of exhaustion carved across her face, the strength still coiled in her posture. She reminded him of the land itself, scarred but stubbornly alive. "You've got a name?" he asked finally. She looked at him, eyes glinting like wet stones. "Tala." He nodded once. "Pretty name. Means something, don't it?" "In my tongue," she said, voice low. "It means wolf." Eli smiled faintly. "Figures." The silence that followed wasn't friendly, but it wasn't cruel either. It was the kind of quiet that belonged to people who'd both seen too much and survived anyway. When the fire began to die, Tala lay down a short distance away, her back to him. Eli tossed another log on the embers, staring at the sparks rising into the night sky. He thought of his father's voice, hard and cold, of the night the Apache village burned, of the child he'd once tried to save, and the woman that child had become, sleeping on the ground behind him now. The guilt sat in his chest like a stone. Maybe saving her had nothing to do with her at all. Maybe it was about proving to himself that he wasn't the same kind of man his father had been. But as the coyotes began to howl across the valley, Eli realized something deeper. He hadn't just brought home a girl from a broken tribe. He'd brought home the past, and the past was wide awake. The Tanner Ranch sat on the edge of the high desert, where the wind never slept, and the fences leaned like tired men. The buildings were simple, a weather-beaten barn, a small cabin, a well half dry, but they stood stubborn against the elements, much like the man who owned them. When Eli Tanner led Tala through the gate, the horses lifted their heads from the troughs, nostrils flaring. Even the animals could feel it. Something new, something uneasy in the air. He pointed toward the small storage shed beside the barn. "You can take that room. It ain't much, but it's dry." Tala didn't answer. She stepped inside, her shadow crossing the dusty threshold. The space smelled of hay and old cedar. There was a cot, a thin blanket, a bucket, and a cracked window that looked out onto the hills. She dropped her small satchel, nothing more than a bundle of rags, and stood there a long while, silent. Eli lingered by the door, hat in hand. "You'll be safe here," he said. She gave a slow nod, still facing the wall. The days that followed were quiet, so quiet the ranch seemed to hold its breath. Tala worked from sunrise to dusk. She fetched water from the well, scrubbed floors until her knuckles split, and patched holes in the roof without being told. She never complained. She never spoke more than a few words. The only sound she made was the steady rhythm of her chores, the scrape of the broom, the splash of water, the soft hum of a tune that might have belonged to her people once. At night, she'd sit by the small hearth, eyes lost in the fire. The flames flickered over her face, revealing both strength and sorrow. To Eli, she looked like someone carved from the land itself, wild, enduring, and marked by loss. He watched her from a distance, pretending to fix tools or check the horses just to keep from staring too long. Every movement of hers carried a quiet grace, and every silence reminded him of the voices that had been silenced 8 years ago when his father's men set the Apache camp ablaze. Sometimes, in the dead of night, Eli would wake to the sound of her crying, soft, muffled, almost prayerful. But by dawn, she'd be up again, working like nothing had happened. He tried once to speak to her, out by the corral. "You don't have to do all this," he said. She didn't stop raking. "Work keeps the ghosts away," she murmured. Eli wanted to tell her the truth, that work had never silenced his ghosts, only tired him enough to stop listening to them. But the words died in his throat. Days blurred together. Dust and sweat, sun and silence. They shared meals in quiet. She'd sit at the far end of the table, eyes lowered, hands steady. He'd thank her for the food, and she'd nod once, nothing more. Yet something was changing. The air between them had shifted. Not warmer, not yet, but less sharp, like a wound starting to close around the edges. Sometimes, when Eli came in late from fixing fences, he'd find the lantern left burning by the door. No words, no thanks, no acknowledgement. Just the light. And for the first time in years, he started to believe maybe, just maybe, the silence wasn't punishment. Maybe it was mercy. The wind came hard off the ridge that morning, dry and biting, carrying the smell of rain that would never come. Eli was out by the corral, mending a broken fence post when he heard it. The slow rhythm of hooves. Not the kind of sound that belonged to travelers or ranch hands. This one was steady, deliberate, official. He didn't have to look up to know who it was. Sheriff Dalton. The man rode in wearing a tan duster and the same smug grin he'd worn the night the Apache camp went up in flames. His badge caught the sunlight like a curse. Behind him, the dust rose in lazy spirals, as if even the desert was trying to hide from him. Dalton reined in his horse near the barn, squinting toward the house. His eyes landed on Tala, who was hanging wet laundry on the line, her sleeves rolled up, her movements slow and deliberate. She froze when she saw him. The wind tugged at her hair, whipping strands across her face, but she didn't flinch. She just stared, jaw tight, hands gripping the fabric so hard her knuckles went white. Dalton's grin widened. "Well, I'll be damned," he drawled. "Didn't think I'd ever see one of them walking around free again." Eli straightened from the fence, his hammer still in hand. "Morning, Sheriff," he said, his tone calm but cold. Dalton dismounted, boots crunching on dry dirt. He tipped his hat mockingly toward Tala. "She yours, Tanner? Heard tell you picked up a stray down at the old barn auction." Eli set the hammer down and stepped closer. "I paid to get her out of there, that's all." Dalton chuckled. "Sure you did. Funny thing, though. Every man who says that usually sleeps a little easier once there's a warm body by the fire." The words hit the air like a slap. Tala's eyes burned, but she said nothing. Eli's jaw tightened, the lines around his eyes deepening. "You got something to say, Sheriff," Eli said quietly. "Say it plain." Dalton walked closer, his spurs jingling. "Just saying, folks don't forget what she is, what her people did. Remember that raid? The one your old man cleaned up nice for the Union? The one where a few of my boys never made it back?" Eli's gaze didn't waver. "I remember a lot of good men dying that night, but not for the reasons you like to tell it." For a moment, the only sound was the creak of leather and the restless snort of Dalton's horse. Then the sheriff reached into his pocket, pulled out a single brass bullet, and set it upright on the fence post between them. "A reminder," he said, his voice soft but sharp as a blade. "Some ghosts don't stay buried, Tanner." Eli didn't move. He just stared at that bullet gleaming in the sun, his reflection warped in its surface. Dalton smiled thinly, climbed back onto his horse, and turned toward the road. "Take care of yourself, rancher. Would be a shame if your past came knocking again." He rode off, leaving a trail of dust and the echo of his laughter behind. When he was gone, Tala walked up beside Eli. Her voice was quiet, trembling with something between anger and fear. "Who was that?" Eli didn't look at her. His eyes stayed fixed on the bullet. "Trouble," he said finally. "And he's just getting started." The wind kicked up again, scattering dust over the fence line. The bullet stayed where it was, glinting gold in the fading sun, a promise that peace out here never lasted long. The wind screamed across the Tanner ranch like a wounded animal, rattling the shutters and sweeping dust under the door. The old cabin moaned in protest, its walls trembling with every gust. Eli Tanner sat by the hearth, staring into the fire that burned low and stubborn, the only light in a night full of ghosts. Tala was across the room, knees pulled close, wrapped in a rough wool blanket. The storm outside mirrored the one inside her. Every crack of thunder made her flinch, though she'd never show it. She'd learned long ago to hide her fear behind silence. For hours, neither spoke. The only sound was the wind and the slow pop of resin in the firewood. Then Tala reached into her pocket and drew out something small, a strand of turquoise beads, worn smooth by time and tears. The color caught the firelight, glowing like water in the desert. She set it gently on the table between them. "My father wore this," she said quietly, "the day he died." Eli's hand froze halfway to the coffee pot. His throat tightened. He looked at the necklace, and then at her. Her eyes weren't accusing, not yet, just waiting. "You knew him," she said. It wasn't a question. Eli nodded once, slow, his voice rough as gravel. "I did." Tala's expression didn't change, but her fingers curled on the table. "Then tell me what happened," she whispered. "All of it." For a long time, Eli said nothing. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, the firelight carving lines into his face. Lines of guilt, lines of years. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a rasp. "My father, Caleb Tanner. He was the one who gave the order," he said. "Said the Apaches were trespassing on Tanner land. Truth is, it wasn't ours. Never was." The words came like splinters, sharp and slow. "I was just a kid. I rode out with him and a few soldiers. Thought it was going to be talk, maybe scare your people off. But when the shots started, I froze. I remember the smoke, the screams, the smell of pine and blood." Tala's jaw clenched. The fire cracked, throwing sparks into the air. "I saw your father," Eli continued. "He was trying to get the women and children to the river. I tried to stop one of the men from shooting him, but I wasn't fast enough. He fell right by the water, still holding this." He nodded toward the turquoise necklace. "I picked it up. Been carrying it ever since." Tala's voice broke, though it was still barely more than a whisper. "You could have stopped them." "I know." "You didn't." He looked up, meeting her eyes at last. "I was a coward," he said simply, "and I've been paying for it every damn day since." The fire hissed. Outside, the storm roared louder, beating against the cabin as if the sky itself wanted to hear his confession. Tala reached out, fingers brushing the turquoise. Her hand trembled, but she didn't pull away. "So that's why you bought me," she said, her tone flat, wounded. "To make peace with your ghosts." Eli swallowed hard. "No. I bought you because I couldn't stand seeing another life sold like that. I figured maybe doing one right thing would make the rest a little less wrong." Tala stared at him for a long time, long enough for the storm to fade to a whisper. Then she gathered the necklace into her palm, stood, and turned toward her room. Before stepping into the shadows, she said, "The storm's over, Tanner, but the fire's still burning." And then she was gone. Eli sat alone, watching the dying firelight flicker across the turquoise beads still glowing faintly on the tabletop, a reminder that some sins never stay buried and some storms never truly pass. The storm had spent itself against the hills, leaving behind a heavy stillness that clung to everything. The air, the earth, the heart. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned down to embers. Tala sat close to it, her fingers wrapped so tightly around the turquoise necklace that her knuckles turned white. Tears slipped down her face, but she made no sound. She'd seen too much in her life to give pain a voice. The beads dug into her palm, sharp reminders of her father, of home, of everything the flames had taken. Across from her, Eli Tanner sat hunched in his chair, hat off, eyes fixed on the floor. The smell of rain drifted through the cracks in the window, mingled with smoke and sorrow. "Now you think saying it makes it better?" Tala's voice broke the quiet. It wasn't loud, but it carried more weight than a gunshot. Eli shook his head slowly. "No," he said, his tone steady but hollow. "It don't make a damn thing better. But you deserve to know who you've been working beside." The words hung in the air like dust. Outside, thunder rolled again, low and distant, not angry now, just tired. The sound made Tala look up at the ceiling as if the heavens themselves were passing judgment. Eli leaned forward, his hands clasped, elbows resting on his knees. "I ain't looking for forgiveness," he said after a moment. "I just wanted you to hear it from me, not from the mouths that twist it into lies." Tala looked at him through the shimmer of the firelight. For the first time, there was something in her eyes besides fury. Not mercy, not yet, but a faint flicker of understanding, the kind that only comes when someone's pain starts to look like your own. She spoke softly, almost to herself. "When they burned our camp, my father said the earth remembers every footprint. Maybe it remembers every sin too." Eli nodded. "Then I reckon this land's got my name written all over it." The silence that followed wasn't cold like before. It felt heavy, but alive, like the pause before rain breaks the drought. Tala loosened her grip on the turquoise, letting it rest against her palm instead of digging in. The firelight caught the beads, turning them into tiny drops of ocean blue against her skin. For a long while, they just sat there, the rancher and the Apache girl, both staring into the same flames for different reasons. One saw the faces he'd failed to save. The other saw the home she'd lost. Outside, a flash of lightning rolled across the distant mesa, cutting through the darkness. Tala turned toward the sound, then back at Eli. Her voice was quieter now, but clearer. "You carry his blood," she said. "But maybe you don't have to carry his shadow." Eli looked at her, the corner of his mouth twitching. Not quite a smile, but close. "Maybe," he said. "But shadows run long in this country." Tala nodded, gaze drifting back to the fire. "Then we'll ride in the daylight." The words settled between them like the first calm after a storm. Eli leaned back in his chair, the tension in his shoulders easing just a little. Tala's tears had dried, but her eyes still shone, reflecting the last flicker of the dying fire. And somewhere in that quiet cabin, amid the ashes and the rain, forgiveness began to take root. Small, fragile, and real. The world smelled new after the rain, the kind of clean that only comes when the desert decides to start over. The mud still clung to the wagon wheels, and puddles shimmered in the ruts of the road like mirrors catching the morning sun. Eli Tanner was out by the east fence, his hat pulled low, hammering new boards into place. His hands were steady but slow. He'd been fixing fences his whole life, yet this morning felt different, heavier somehow, as if every nail was a prayer for redemption. Behind him, the cabin door creaked open. Tala stepped out into the crisp air, her long black hair damp and tangled from washing, her bare feet silent in the soft earth. She carried a hammer in one hand and a bundle of nails in the other. The sight of her out in daylight, without fear or anger clouding her face, made Eli pause mid-swing. "You're doing it wrong," she said simply, her voice calm but sure. Eli turned, eyebrows raised. "That so?" Tala nodded, walking closer. She dropped the nails in a small pile and knelt beside the post he was struggling with. "If you set it like that," she said, tapping the wood with her fingers, "it'll pull loose after the first wind." Her tone wasn't harsh, just matter of fact, the way someone speaks when they know what they're doing and don't need to prove it. Eli handed her the hammer, without argument. "Show me then." She took it, set the board, and swung with a clean, confident motion. The nail sank in straight and sure. Eli watched, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Well," he said, "guess I've been building fences wrong for 20 years. Tala gave a small shrug, a ghost of a grin flickering across her lips. "Maybe you just needed better wood," she said. For a while, neither spoke. The only sounds were the rhythmic thud of the hammer and the chirp of birds returning after the storm. The desert, washed clean of dust, glowed under the rising sun. Each strike of Tala's hammer echoed like a heartbeat, steady, grounding, alive. At one point, Eli straightened his back and wiped the sweat from his brow. "You ever built fences before?" he asked. Tala shook her head. "No," she said, "but I've built traps, shelters, walls to keep wolves out. Ain't much difference, is there?" Eli chuckled, a low, warm sound. "No, ma'am, not much difference at all." They worked until the fence stretched straight again, sturdy and whole. Eli leaned on the post, breathing deep, feeling the ache in his arms and something lighter in his chest. He looked at Tala, standing a few feet away, her face lit by sunlight. "Thank you," he said. She tilted her head slightly. "For what?" "For not letting me build it wrong." Tala smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the lips but softens the eyes. "You'll get it right next time." As they packed up the tools, the silence between them no longer felt like a wall. It was something gentler now, a bridge. Eli turned toward the cabin. "Coffee's on the stove," he said. Tala nodded, following him inside. The air was still cool, but the sun was climbing fast, turning the wet ground to steam. For the first time since the fire years ago, Eli Tanner felt like the world wasn't holding its breath anymore. Maybe the past couldn't be buried. But standing beside Tala under that wide, forgiving sky, he thought, maybe it could be rebuilt. The light in the west turned gold, then copper, then the color of old blood. The air smelled of sagebrush and dust, carried on a wind that whispered through the dry grass like prayer. Eli Tanner stood by the fence line with a hammer and chisel in hand, sweat streaking the dirt on his face. All day he'd been working, measuring, shaping, lifting the 2 slabs of stone he'd dragged from the creek bed at dawn. His shoulders burned, his palms blistered, but he didn't stop. He worked like a man digging his way out of his own grave. When the stones were set, side by side beneath the wide Arizona sky, he wiped his hands on his jeans and stared at them for a long while. The ranch was quiet behind him, just the faint sound of chickens settling in and the creak of the windmill turning slow. Then he knelt, took the chisel, and carved with a patience that came from both reverence and regret. The letters came rough at first, then smoother as he found his rhythm. Tahan. Father of Tala, for the people of the river. When he finished, the sun was dropping behind the ridges. The sky burned orange and violet, and the first chill of evening crept in. He laid his tools aside and stood there, hat in hand, head bowed. A few minutes later, Tala appeared at the edge of the field. She moved quietly, as she always did, her dress brushing the grass, her dark hair catching the last light of day. For a moment, she just stood behind him, watching. Eli didn't turn. He didn't need to. He felt her presence like a change in the air. She stepped closer until she could read the words carved into the stone. Her breath caught. The names, the care in every imperfect line. It was more than a memorial. It was an apology in the only language Eli knew how to speak. Without a word, Tala reached into her pocket and pulled out the turquoise necklace. The beads glowed faintly in the fading light, the color of river water just before dusk. She held it a moment longer, then laid it gently across the first stone. "Keep it here," she said softly, "for the ones who never got to rest." Her fingers lingered on the carved letters, tracing each groove as though memorizing it by touch. A tear rolled down her cheek, catching the light before falling into the dust. Eli swallowed hard, his voice low and rough. "Didn't know what else to give," he said. Tala looked at him, eyes shining with something fragile, something that wasn't hate anymore. "You gave enough." A faint smile crossed her lips, small but real. It was the first one he'd ever seen from her that wasn't forced by pain. They stood there together as the sky deepened to indigo, the first stars blinking awake over the desert. Wind whispered through the fence, through the stones, through the beads that now shimmered in the dying light. Eli set his hand on the top of one stone, feeling the chill of it, and said quietly, "Guess the land remembers after all." Tala nodded. "It always does." And for once, the wind carried no sorrow in its song, only peace. That night, the desert sky was endless, a sea of stars scattered over black velvet. The wind had gone quiet, the kind of quiet that made even the coyotes hold their breath. Tala sat by the window, knees drawn up, her dark hair spilling over her shoulders, eyes lifted toward the horizon where the moon hung low. She wasn't hiding in the corner anymore. For the first time since she'd arrived, she wasn't waiting for morning with dread. The world outside shimmered silver, soft and calm, and she felt it. That rare stillness that doesn't ask questions, doesn't take sides. Across the room, Eli Tanner sat in his worn chair, boots off, the fire casting amber light over his weathered face. He watched her in silence, careful not to disturb whatever peace had found its way between them. For years, he'd known only noise, the clatter of tools, the wind against the barn, the ghosts that whispered his father's name. Now there was just quiet, and a warmth he didn't understand, but didn't dare break. When Tala finally turned, her gaze met his. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. In that look, there was something steady, not love, not yet, but trust, fragile as the morning dew. Eli gave a slow nod, tipping his head slightly, the way a man greets a friend he's known forever but never truly seen. The days that followed passed like slow-moving clouds. Tala stayed. She planted small seeds along the edge of the field, beans, corn, a few wildflowers she'd found near the creek. She fed the horses, brushed them until their coats gleamed, and laughed once, really laughed, when Eli tripped over a half-filled bucket and swore under his breath. That laugh stayed with him all day. They didn't talk about the past anymore. There was no need. Out here, in the rhythm of chores and sunrise, forgiveness had taken another shape, quiet, practical, alive. Every nail hammered, every seed buried was its own confession, its own prayer. Sometimes, when the wind came soft through the open door, Eli would glance at the hill where two stones stood side by side, catching the light. The turquoise necklace shimmered faintly in the sun. And he'd feel it again. That strange peace that didn't erase the pain, but made it bearable. One evening, as the sun began to fall, Tala joined him on the porch. The sky burned in streaks of red and gold, the color of endings and beginnings. She rested her arms on her knees, looking toward the fence line. "Your land's quiet," she said softly. "Finally," Eli replied, a small smile touching his lips. "Took a long time for it to learn how." They sat without speaking after that, just watching the light fade. When the sun dipped behind the ridge, Tala turned to him. "What'll you do now, Tanner?" she asked. He thought for a moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Keep building," he said. "The right way this time." She nodded, her smile faint but certain. The sky turned crimson, then violet, then deep blue. The land breathed slow, like it had forgiven itself. And under that quiet, forgiving sky, two people, one carrying guilt, the other loss, found the kind maybe peace isn't something you find. Maybe it's something you build, one honest day at a time. If you had to start again, like Eli and Tala, would you choose to bury the past or plant something new in its place?